Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are the core values of our nation that the Declaration of Independence declares shall be granted to every person. The Brundtland Report, published in 1987 by the World Commission on Environment and Development, last accessed April 19, 2020, characterizes sustainability as sustainable development that can meet the needs of the present without compromising the needs of future generations, their lives, liberties, and their pursuits of happiness. Our inability to find adequate storage for radioactive nuclear waste could potentially or almost certainly violate this contract. To exhibit this, I will be going over why nuclear waste is so dangerous, not only to future generations, but to ourselves as well. And I will also highlight some storage solutions that have been proposed and why those storage solutions are inadequate, as well as propose some solutions for the future. To understand nuclear waste management, I feel it's important to first understand why nuclear waste is so dangerous. Spent nuclear fuel is very hot and lethally radioactive after it comes out of a reactor. Some of these fission products will remain highly radioactive for tens of thousands of years. According to the Environmental Working Group's website, ewg.org, last accessed April 20th, 2020, a rail cask like this one, you can see it's on the very back of that train there. This image was taken from Sandia National Laboratories, but a rail cask like this one can hold up to 200 times the amount of long-lived radiation as did the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. So that is a lot of radiation. And that's just one of those casks. Currently, there are two options for interim storage. When the fuel assemblies are first extracted from the extractors, they are so hot they need to be submerged in water for 5 to 10 years to cool down enough to be placed in a dry cask for storage. And a dry cask is that image on the back of the train that I showed you. Bundles of the spent fuel assemblies are sealed in airtight metal chambers that is then placed inside another metal or sometimes concrete cask that is used to help shield the radiation coming out of that initial chamber, that first one, kind of like a Russian nesting doll. The U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission states on their website, last accessed April 21st, 2020, that spent fuel pools and dry casks are safe temporary storage options, but some industry officials disagree. Earlier this year in January, Paul Blanche, a nuclear engineering expert and former nuclear operator, was quoted as saying to a nuclear decommissioning citizens advisory council in Massachusetts, quote, "In my unbiased opinion, safety is not a priority for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Its goal is to ensure the economic viability of the nuclear industry. Holtec, which Holtec is the company that makes many of the dry casks that are currently being used in the United States, Holtec's cask design and engineering are severely deficient. Who is financially responsible when failure occurs? What happens 20, 30, 40 years from now when there's a leak and Holtec isn't around?" End quote. So now I know what you're thinking. 40 years, but you said that was supposed to be like interim storage. Well, according to the U.S. Government Accountability's Office, GAO.gov, last accessed April 23rd, 2020, there are currently 90,000 tons of deadly radioactive waste materials in the United States with no viable long-term storage solutions. Nuclear waste needs to be stored for at least 10,000 years. This poses a problem to nuclear plant operators and government regulatory committees because we are fundamentally unable to determine what will happen to a storage facility in the span of 10,000 years. I mean, we just can't realistically fathom that amount of time. 10,000 years ago, humanity was just figuring out farming and agriculture. And 10,000 years ago, we were 4,000 years away from our first complex civilization. I mean, it's an unimaginable amount of time. However, hindsight be damned, and in 1999, the nation's first geological repository, the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, also known as WIPP, was officially licensed to start storing waste. In the beginning, it was fairly smooth sailing, but Reuters reported in an article in 2014, last accessed April 24th, 2020, that only 15 years into its 10,000 plus year operation, a barrel containing radioactive isotopes, that's this barrel right there, you can see it leaking at the top, A barrel containing radioactive isotopes leaked at the WIP site, and exposed 22 employees to radiation. This image was also taken from The Guardian. Now, what if I told you there was an answer? An answer that will keep ourselves and our loved ones, our children and our grandchildren, and future generations safe from toxic radiation. Renewable energy can do that. Renewables are safer, better for the environment, and cheaper. No need to worry about cancer caused by a leaky dry cask or one of the many temporary storage facilities currently in the United States. And renewable energy is getting cheaper with new technologies all the time. In June of 2019, Forbes published an article titled "Renewable Energy is Now the Cheapest Option Even Without Government Subsidies." And that was last accessed April 24th, 2020. And a 2005 paper published in the Journal of Geophysical Research states that the United States is geologically in a superb position to produce wind energy. Wind-generated power could easily supply, quote, 100% of the world's energy demand for all purposes and over 7 times the world's electricity needs. 4 states alone account for over half the United States wind energy production, with Texas being the number 1 contributor, according to EIA.gov. And other states are embracing hydropower. Washington gets 27% of its electricity from hydropower dams. That's also taken from EIA.gov. It is our duty to protect the vital interests and the generations that follow us, their lives, liberties, and their pursuits of happiness. An inability to predict faults or corrosion of equipment over the span of 10,000 years could lead to large amounts of radiation escaping into the atmosphere, causing cancer clusters, killing wildlife and local ecosystems, and poisoning local food and water supplies. It is not our place to gamble the lives of hundreds of generations of people, not when we have other viable options available. Today we discussed why nuclear waste is so dangerous and examined 2 popular renewable resources as good alternatives for the future. Now, when nuclear energy first came online after World War II, in an era defined by uncertainty and oil rationing, it made sense. Energy independence from cheap overseas energy prices was appealing. But already we are feeling the effects of that decision as spent fuel pools started filling up in the 80s, and the not yet completed Yucca project would be filled within a year. It's time to say no to the nuclear power industry.